Have you ever heard the loneliest sound in the world? It's not silence. It's the wet shush of tires on rain-slicked pavement, late at night, when the city holds its breath. That sound wrapped around Leo like a cold, damp coat as he stood by his third-floor window, April rain streaking the glass like tears. Brooklyn, 2023. The air smelled of wet concrete, distant garbage, and the faint, hopeful green of early spring fighting through the grime. Inside his apartment, the silence was thick, heavy. It pressed in, filled only by the hollow tick of a clock his grandmother had left him, a sound that seemed louder now that she was gone. Leo felt untethered, adrift in his own life. The grief wasn't a sharp pain anymore. It had settled into a deep, quiet ache, a constant companion since Nana Rose passed 3 months ago. Moving into her old apartment felt like stepping into a museum of memories, every corner whispering of her warmth, her laughter, the smell of her lavender cookies. He'd come to sort through her things, to maybe find a foothold in the city again after his own life out west had crumbled, a failed relationship, a job that felt meaningless. He felt like a ghost haunting his own past. He'd stare at the boxes half-packed in the living room, the familiar furniture draped in dusty sheets, and feel a crushing weight of indecision. Should he stay? Sell? Where did he belong now? The rain outside mirrored the gray uncertainty inside him. And then, he saw movement. Down in the narrow alleyway below, squeezed between his building and the old bakery next door. A shadow detaching itself from deeper shadows near the overflowing dumpster. Leo leaned closer, his breath fogging the cold glass. It was a cat. A big, rangy tomcat, for the color of dirty storm clouds. It moved with a stiff-legged caution that spoke of old injuries, or maybe just deep weariness. It wasn't slinking, it was patrolling. Head held low, but alert. Scanning the rain-slicked bricks, the puddles reflecting the dim, yellow glow of a distant security light. Leo watched, transfixed. The cat paused, lifting its head. Raindrops beaded on its fur. And that's when Leo saw it. Saw him. One side of the cat's face was a ruin of scar tissue, a thick, pale wheal that ran from just above where an eye should have been, down across a torn ear, vanishing into the thick fur of his neck. Only one eye remained, a fierce, startlingly green orb that caught the meager light and glowed with an unnerving intensity. The missing eye wasn't just an absence, it was a story etched in flesh. A story of survival, written in pain. The cat, Leo instantly thought of him as Captain, though he didn't know why, turned his head, that single luminous eye scanning upwards. For a heartbeat, impossibly, it seemed to lock onto Leo's face in the window. Leo froze, caught. There was no fear in that green gaze. No pleading. Just an ancient kind of watchfulness. A raw assessment. Then, as if dismissing him, Captain lowered his head, gave a rough shake that sent water flying, and limped purposefully towards the back of the alley, disappearing into the gloom near the bakery's service door. Leo stayed at the window long after the cat vanished. The rain kept falling. The tires kept shushing on the street below. But the silence inside the apartment felt different now. Less empty. It was filled with the lingering image of that scarred face, that single, penetrating eye. He hadn't just seen a stray cat, he'd seen a survivor. A creature carved by the harsh edges of the world, still standing, still watching. Later, making a cup of tea he didn't really want, Leo found himself drawn back to the window. He scanned the alley, now just a dark trench filled with the rhythmic drumming of rain. Nothing. But the image of Captain wouldn't leave him. The stiff-legged walk. The way he'd scanned the alley like a sentry. The absolute, unflinching intensity of that one green eye. It stirred something in Leo's own numbness. The flicker of something. Not quite curiosity. Not quite empathy. More like recognition. A silent nod passed between two souls adrift in the rain. Leo placed his palm flat against the cold window pane, feeling the vibration of the city thrumming beneath his skin. He didn't know it yet, standing there in the dim light of his grandmother's kitchen, smelling dust and rain and his own loneliness, but the alley below, and the scarred warrior who patrolled it, had just become his compass. Something quiet, something undeniable, had shifted deep within him. A story was beginning, not with a roar, but with the watchful silence of a one-eyed cat in the rain. The rain stopped sometime before dawn, leaving Brooklyn glistening under a weak, watery sun. Leo woke not to the hollow apartment silence, but to a low, rhythmic sound drifting up from the alley, a sound like sandpaper on wood. He shuffled to the window, still wrapped in the fog of uneasy sleep, the weight of Nana Rose's absence a familiar ache in his chest. He peered down. Captain. There he was. Not patrolling this time, but sitting upright, regal even in his raggedness, near the damp bricks beneath Leo's fire escape. He was meticulously cleaning the massive paw on his uninjured side, rasping his rough tongue over the gray fur with intense concentration. The morning light caught the deep grooves of his scars, turning the pale tissue almost pearlescent against his dark fur. He moved with a stiff dignity, every lick deliberate, every shift of his weight calculated to minimize strain on that stiff leg. Leo watched, fascinated. The cat seemed utterly absorbed in his task, a small island of self-contained ritual in the grimy alley. It was comforting, somehow. A creature so battered, yet so focused on the simple act of grooming. Leo felt a pang of his own dishevelment. The unwashed dishes, the half-eaten takeout, the dusty chaos of unpacked memories. He moved quietly to the kitchen, filled a small, chipped saucer Nana Rose had used for her violets with cool water, and grabbed a can of tuna he'd bought on a whim days ago, a concession to his own neglected meals. He cracked the window open just an inch. The cool, damp air rushed in, smelling of wet brick and the faint, yeasty tang from the bakery below. Captain's head snapped up instantly. That single, luminous green eye fixed on the window, the grooming forgotten. His body went taut, ready to bolt. Leo froze, holding his breath. He placed the saucer of water carefully on the fire escape landing just outside the window, then spooned a generous mound of tuna onto a clean paper plate beside it. The smell was pungent, immediate. Without a word, Leo retreated inside, closing the window almost all the way, leaving just a crack. He stepped back into the shadows of the room, his heart thumping strangely against his ribs. He watched through the glass. Captain remained statue still for a long, tense minute. His good eye never left the window, scanning the glass, the frame, the shadows within Leo's apartment. His nostrils flared, taking in the scent of the tuna, the water, the unfamiliar human presence. Slowly, cautiously, he lowered his head, sniffing the air intently. His stiff legs seemed to protest as he took one hesitant step towards the bottom of the fire escape ladder. Then another. His movements were painfully slow, each step a calculated risk. He paused again, halfway, ears swiveling like radar dishes, listening to the city sounds, a distant siren, the rumble of a delivery truck, the shout of a baker opening the back door. Leo held his breath. He felt absurdly invested. Would the cat flee? Would he ignore it? The simple act of offering food suddenly felt fraught with meaning, a tiny bridge cast over the chasm of their separate solitudes. Captain took another step. then another. He reached the bottom landing. He stretched his neck, sniffing the air just below the tuna plate. His tail, thick and ragged, twitched once. He glanced back towards the alley mouth, then up at Leo's window again. Leo remained perfectly still, a shadow behind the glass. Finally, with a speed that belied his earlier stiffness, Captain hopped lightly onto the first metal step of the fire escape. He moved with surprising agility up to the landing where the offering sat. He didn't look at the water or the food immediately. Instead, he sat down again, facing the alley, his back partially to the window, but his good ears swiveled constantly towards Leo. He was a sentry, accepting the gift but keeping watch. Only then did he lower his head. Not to the tuna first, but to the water. He lapped cautiously, quickly, his pink tongue dipping rhythmically into the saucer. The sound was small, soft, a quiet affirmation of thirst quenched. He drank for a long time. Then, finally, he turned to the tuna. He ate with a focused intensity, not wolfing it down, but taking deliberate bites, chewing thoroughly, his scarred jaw working. He ate every scrap, meticulously cleaning the paper plate with his tongue until it gleamed. When he was done, he sat back on his haunches, gave a single rough lick to his scarred muzzle, and then he looked directly at the window. Not a fleeting glance, but a steady, deliberate gaze. Leo could see the intelligence in that green eye, a depth that startled him. It wasn't just wariness, it was assessment, acknowledgement. Captain held his gaze for a few heartbeats. Then, without a sound, he turned, hopped down the fire escape steps with surprising grace despite his leg, and melted back into the shadows of the alley, disappearing around the corner of the bakery. Leo let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The paper plate sat empty. The saucer held only a few drops. A profound sense of accomplishment washed over him. Ridiculous, perhaps, but real. He'd made contact. He'd been seen. He touched the cold glass where the cat had looked through. The hollow tick of Nana Rose's clock seemed a little less loud. It became a ritual. Every morning, just after dawn, Leo would crack the window and place fresh water and food, tuna, sometimes bits of cooked chicken, a spoonful of wet cat food he'd started buying on the fire escape landing. And every morning, Captain would appear. Sometimes from the alley shadows, sometimes already perched on a lower rung, waiting. His arrival was never predictable in timing, but his caution remained constant. He'd watch the window, wait for Leo to retreat, then approach with that same deliberate care. He always drank first, deeply, then ate with quiet intensity. He never meowed, never begged. His communication was silent, composed of looks and posture and presence. Leo found himself looking forward to it. It became the first anchor of his day. Sorting through Nana Rose's belongings, her soft cardigan still holding a ghost of her lavender scent, her collection of ceramic birds, boxes of old photographs filled with smiling faces he barely remembered, felt less overwhelming when punctuated by these quiet moments of connection with the scarred alley sentinel. He started talking to the cat through the glass, his voice low and soft. "Morning, Captain. Looks chilly out there." Or, "Hope the bakery scraps were lousy last night. Got some salmon today." It felt less like talking to an animal and more like confiding in a silent witness. Captain never reacted to the words, but he always seemed to listen, his ear flicking towards the sound. One drizzly afternoon, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of memories packed into cardboard, Leo sank onto the dusty living room floor, surrounded by open boxes. He pulled out a photo album. Nana Rose at Coney Island, laughing on the boardwalk, decades younger. Nana Rose holding a tiny Leo on her lap, reading him a story. The grief, held at bay by the routine of sorting, crashed over him. It wasn't just sadness, it was guilt. Guilt for not visiting more. Guilt for living so far away when she grew frail. Guilt for the relief he sometimes felt, mixed with the loss, that the burden of her decline was over. Tears welled, hot and sudden, spilling down his cheeks. He sat there, silent sobs shaking his shoulders, the open album a painful weight on his lap. A soft scraping sound at the window made him jump. He looked up, hastily wiping his face. Captain was there on the fire escape landing. Not waiting for food. It wasn't time. He was sitting upright, facing into the apartment, his single eye fixed on Leo. Raindrops beaded on his fur. He wasn't eating. He wasn't drinking. He was just watching. His head was tilted slightly, as if studying Leo's tear-streaked face through the glass. His usual wariness was absent. Instead, there was a stillness, an intensity of focus that felt attentive, curious even. Leo felt strangely exposed, yet somehow not judged. It was as if the cat recognized the raw emotion, the silent storm inside the room. Captain held his gaze for a long moment, his green eye unblinking. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he lowered his head, not to groom, not to rest, but in a gesture that seemed almost respectful, acknowledging the shared space of sorrow. He stayed like that for a minute, a silent companion in the gray afternoon light, before turning and disappearing back down the fire escape without a backward glance. Leo sat on the floor for a long time after, the photo album forgotten. The weight of guilt hadn't vanished, but the sharp edge of his grief felt witnessed, shared in a wordless way. He touched the cold window pane again, where Captain had pressed his presence against Leo's pain. The apartment didn't feel quite so empty. The silence held a new quality, not just absence, but the potential for a quiet, scarred understanding. He realized he was holding his breath, waiting for the next sign, the next small step in this fragile, wordless dance between two broken creatures finding their way. He wasn't just feeding a stray anymore. He was building something tentative, real, and utterly unexpected. One cautious step, one shared silence at a time. The rhythm of their fragile alliance settled into Leo's days like a new heartbeat. Dawn brought the quiet ritual. The window cracked, the fresh water, the carefully chosen offering, sometimes tuna, sometimes chicken, occasionally a dollop of plain yogurt Captain seemed to relish. Leo found himself lingering longer at the window, not just placing the food, but watching the alley wake up. The clatter of the bakery's early deliveries, the smell of baking bread drifting upwards, the distant rumble of the city stirring. And always, Captain. He arrived with the quiet certainty of the sunrise itself. His movements were less stiff now, Leo noticed, or perhaps he'd just learned the cat's economy of motion. He'd appear from the deep shadow near the bakery's overflowing dumpster, or materialize silently on the lower rung of the fire escape. His approach to the landing was still cautious, always scanning, always listening, that single green eye missing nothing. But he no longer waited for Leo to fully retreat before starting his meal. He'd acknowledge Leo's presence with a slow blink, a gesture Leo had learned was a cat's sign of trust, before dipping his head to the water. The silence between them was comfortable now, a shared language beyond words. Leo talked more. Not just greetings, but fragments of his day. Found Nana's recipe box today, Captain. Remembered her awful meatloaf. Or, staring at a half-packed box of books, should I keep these? Feels like holding on to ghosts. Captain would eat, his ears swiveling towards Leo's voice. occasionally pausing to fix that intense green eye on him. It felt less like talking to himself and more like confiding in a creature who understood the weight of silence, the burden of memory. One muggy evening, thick with the promise of a summer storm, Leo sat by the open window after Captain's evening visit. The air hung heavy, smelling of ozone and hot asphalt. He was sorting through a box of Nana Rose's old linens, the scent of lavender faint but persistent. He pulled out a crocheted blanket, intricate and delicate, remembering how she'd draped it over his shoulders when he was sick as a child. The memory was warm, but underneath it stirred the familiar guilt, the phone calls he'd cut short, the birthdays he'd missed near the end. He sighed, running his fingers over the soft yarn. A low sound drifted up from the alley. Not the usual city noises. A guttural, rhythmic thump thump thump. It was coming from below, near the bakery's back wall. Leo leaned out the window, peering down into the deepening twilight. Captain was there. But he wasn't patrolling. He wasn't resting. He was standing rigidly near a pile of discarded cardboard boxes stacked against the brick wall. His tail was a thick, lashing whip. His hackles were raised, making him look even larger, more formidable. His scarred face was pressed close to a gap between two boxes, his single eye blazing with an intensity Leo had never seen. And his uninjured front paw, he was striking the cardboard. Not scratching randomly, but pounding it with a focused, powerful thump thump thump. It wasn't play. It wasn't grooming. It was deliberate. Aggressive? Protective? Leo called softly, "Captain?" "Hey, buddy." The cat didn't flinch, didn't look up. His entire being was concentrated on that gap in the boxes, his paw striking the cardboard with relentless, unsettling force. Thump, thump, thump. The sound echoed in the still, heavy air. Leo felt a prickle of unease crawl up his spine. What was hidden there? Rats? Something dangerous? Captain's posture radiated fierce defense, a guardian stance utterly at odds with the wary survivor Leo knew. He watched, transfixed and disturbed, as Captain continued his assault on the cardboard for several minutes. Then, as abruptly as it started, it stopped. Captain lowered his paw. He took a step back, his body still tense, his gaze fixed on the gap. He sniffed the air intently, his scarred muzzle wrinkling. Then, with a low growl that vibrated up to Leo's window, a sound more felt than heard, Captain turned and melted back into the shadows near the dumpster, disappearing from view. The silence that followed felt charged, electric. Leo pulled back inside, closing the window partway against the oppressive humidity. The image of Captain, transformed into a bristling, pounding sentinel, wouldn't leave him. What had provoked that? It felt primal, important. He glanced at the half-sorted linens, Nana Rose's blankets suddenly forgotten. The quiet companionship of the past weeks felt fragile, pierced by this sudden, unexplained violence. The next morning, Captain arrived for his breakfast as usual. He seemed normal. He blinked slowly at Leo, lapped his water, ate his tuna with quiet focus. There was no sign of the feral intensity from the night before. Leo watched him closely. "What was that about last night, huh?" he murmured. Captain paused mid-lick, his ear flicking towards Leo, but offered no explanation, just resumed his meticulous grooming. But the incident wasn't forgotten. Leo found himself drawn to the window more often, scanning the alley below, especially near that pile of cardboard boxes. He noticed Captain patrolling more frequently, his movements tighter, more alert. He'd pause longer near the boxes, sniffing the air, his ears constantly swiveling. The easy rhythm was broken. A question mark hung in the humid air. A few nights later, the storm finally broke. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder booming over the rooftops. Leo was reading on the couch, Nana Rose's crocheted blanket draped over his legs for comfort. The downpour was deafening. Suddenly, piercing through the drumming rain and thunder, came a sound that made Leo's blood run cold. Not the guttural thumping this time, but a high-pitched, frantic chittering. Tiny, desperate. It was coming from the alley, from near the bakery. Leo rushed to the window, wiping condensation from the glass. The alley was a blur of rain and shadow. He strained to see movement near the cardboard pile. Captain was there, a dark, hunched shape in the downpour. He wasn't alone. Leo squinted. Smaller shapes darted near the boxes. Rats? But the chittering sound was wrong, higher, more avian. Then, a flash of lightning illuminated the scene for a split second. Captain wasn't hunting. He was positioned between the gap in the cardboard and the open alley. And those darting shapes weren't rats. They were birds. Small, dark birds, starlings maybe? Fluttering frantically near the boxes, seemingly trying to get in, while Captain, soaked and formidable, faced outward, his body a low, threatening barrier against what? Before Leo could process it, another lightning flash, simultaneous with a deafening crack of thunder. In that stark, frozen moment, he saw them. Shadows detaching from the deeper gloom near the dumpster. Leaner, sleeker shapes than Captain. 3, maybe 4 cats. Feral eyes glinting in the sudden light. They were stalking forward, low to the wet ground, focused intently on the cardboard pile. On the frantic birds. On Captain. Captain didn't retreat. He lowered his head, his scarred face a mask of ferocity in the lightning's glare. A deep, rumbling growl Leo had never heard before rolled out of him, audible even over the storm. It wasn't just a warning, it was a challenge. A declaration of war. The advancing cats paused, tails lashing, hissing rising above the rain. Leo's hand flew to the window latch. He had to do something. Scare them off. But the alley was 3 stories down, the rain torrential. He was helpless. He watched, heart hammering against his ribs, as the lead feral cat, a scrawny tabby with tattered ears, took another step forward, hissing, baring yellowed teeth. Captain's response was instantaneous. He didn't wait. He lunged. It wasn't graceful. It was brutal, efficient savagery fueled by pure, protective rage. He moved with surprising speed despite his stiff leg, a gray-brown blur slamming into the tabby. Claws flashed. A high-pitched yowl of pain cut through the rain. The other ferals scattered momentarily, then regrouped, circling. Captain whirled, keeping his body squarely between the attackers and the cardboard pile, hissing and spitting like a demon, his single eye blazing with an unholy green fire. He swiped at another cat that darted too close, connecting with a sickening thud. Rain plastered his fur, blood, whose? Mingled with the water dripping from his scars. Leo watched, frozen in horror and awe. This wasn't the dignified survivor or the quiet companion. This was a warrior, scarred and battered, standing his ground against overwhelming odds. Protecting what? What was in that pile worth this? The ferals, unnerved by Captain's ferocity and the violence of the storm, began to retreat, melting back into the shadows near the dumpster, their angry yowls fading. Captain didn't chase them. He stood panting heavily in the pouring rain, soaked to the bone, trembling slightly with adrenaline and exertion. He turned his head, his good eye scanning the alley, ensuring the threat was truly gone. Then, slowly, painfully, he limped back towards the gap in the cardboard boxes. He lowered his head, sniffing intently, his posture shifting from fierce defender to something else. Something gentler. Concerned. Leo pressed his forehead against the cold glass, rain streaking the outside, his own breath fogging the inside. The frantic chittering from within the boxes had subsided into a soft, frightened peeping. Captain settled himself heavily on the wet ground just outside the gap, his body still partially blocking it, facing outwards. He began to lick his injured paw. Leo could see a dark gash now, but his attention remained fixed on the alley, his ears pricked, his scarred profile etched against the dim light. He wasn't leaving. He was standing guard. Leo stepped back from the window, the storm raging outside mirroring the turmoil inside him. The simple act of feeding a stray had spiraled into something he couldn't comprehend. The quiet cat with the watchful eye was a warrior guarding a secret. What fragile life was hidden in that pile of wet cardboard, worth facing down a pack in a thunderstorm? The question hung in the air, heavy and urgent, shattering the fragile peace of their routine. The alley below wasn't just Captain's territory anymore, it was a battlefield. And Leo was a witness, suddenly entangled in a mystery far deeper and far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The connection he'd built felt thin, fragile, against the stark reality of claws and blood in the rain. He needed to know. He needed to understand what Captain was protecting with such savage devotion. The tension was a live wire, humming in the aftermath of the storm. The rain didn't stop. It hammered the fire escape, the alley bricks, Leo's frantic heart against his ribs. He stood frozen for only a second, watching Captain's hunched form through the water-streaked glass. The gray cat was a dark smudge against the soaked cardboard pile, head down, licking furiously at his injured leg. The soft, terrified peeping from within the boxes was a counterpoint to the storm's roar. Captain wasn't just guarding, he was hurt, bleeding, and the ferals could regroup. Leo acted before thought could paralyze him. He spun from the window, grabbing the first thing his hand found, Nana Rose's thick, crocheted blanket, the one he'd held just moments before. It smelled faintly of lavender and dust. He yanked open the apartment door, took the stairs 2 at a time, the worn wood groaning under his haste. The building's back door, rarely used, stuck in its frame. He threw his shoulder against it, once, twice, the damp wood finally giving way with a protesting screech. The alley air hit him like a wall, cold, wet, smelling of rotting garbage, wet fur, and the metallic tang he feared was blood. Rain instantly plastered his hair to his forehead, soaked through his thin t-shirt. He blinked against the downpour, scanning the gloom. Near the bakery wall. Captain's head snapped up as Leo emerged, his single eye wide, blazing green in the dim light filtering from a distant security lamp. A low, warning growl vibrated from his chest, deeper and more menacing than Leo had ever heard. He bared his teeth, stained faintly pink, his body coiling defensively in front of the cardboard gap. Protector. Wounded. Terrified. Easy, Cap, easy, buddy, Leo called, his voice swallowed by the rain but firm. He held his hands out, palms open, the blanket draped over one arm like a useless flag of truce. It's just me, Leo. He took a slow, cautious step forward. Captain's growl intensified. He shifted his weight, trying to stand taller despite the injured leg, which was held awkwardly off the wet ground. Fresh blood, diluted pink by the rain, trickled from a gash on his shoulder. Leo's stomach clenched. You're hurt. Let me help. Another step. Captain hissed, a sharp, explosive sound. His uninjured front paw lifted, claws unsheathed, ready to strike. Leo stopped. He was 5 feet away, close enough to see the rapid rise and fall of Captain's ribs, the way rain plastered the fur around his scarred eye socket, making the old wound look raw and vulnerable. Close enough to hear the frantic, high-pitched peeping from within the cardboard fortress. It sounded impossibly small against the storm. He needed a different approach. Captain wasn't just guarding the nest, he was guarding against everything, including Leo's sudden intrusion. Leo lowered himself slowly, carefully, until he was crouched on the wet, gritty asphalt, making himself smaller, less threatening. The rain soaked through his jeans instantly. He placed Nana Rose's blanket on the ground beside him, a soft, lavender-hued island in the grime. "Okay," Leo breathed, his voice barely audible over the downpour. "I'm not going any closer. See?" He held his hands out again, empty. "Just let me look, please." He met Captain's fierce green gaze. The cat stared back, unblinking, the growl still rumbling in his chest, but the immediate threat posture eased fractionally. His eyes flickered between Leo's face and the blanket, then back to the alley mouth, ever vigilant. The peeping intensified. A tiny, desperate sound. Leo shifted his focus slightly, peering past Captain's tense form towards the gap in the boxes. The cardboard was sodden, collapsing in places. And there, nestled deep within a relatively dry hollow formed by a crushed box and the damp brick wall, he saw it. Movement. Not birds. Not multiple. One tiny creature. A fledgling bird, impossibly young. Its gray down was plastered wetly to its skin, making it look like a half-drowned mouse. Its beak, disproportionately large, gaped open, emitting those frantic, weak peeps. Its eyes were barely open slits. It shivered violently. One wing seemed awkwardly bent. It was utterly alone, utterly helpless. And Captain, this scarred, battle-hardened alley veteran, had faced down a pack of ferals in a thunderstorm for this. The breath left Leo's lungs in a rush. Not rats. Not treasure. Not some feral obsession. A baby bird. A scrap of life clinging desperately to existence in the grimmest of places. Captain wasn't just patrolling, he'd adopted. He'd found something even more vulnerable than himself, and he'd staked his life on protecting it. The recognition hit Leo like a physical blow. This fierce, silent loyalty, it wasn't about territory. It was about responsibility. About choosing to shelter a spark of life when your own existence was a constant fight. It mirrored something deep within Leo, something he hadn't fully acknowledged, the crushing weight of responsibility he'd felt towards Nana Rose near the end, the guilt of feeling inadequate, the desperate desire to protect her fading light. "Oh, Captain," Leo whispered, the words thick with sudden emotion. He looked back at the cat. The growl had subsided, replaced by a tense watchfulness. Captain was still licking his shoulder wound, but his gaze kept darting to the shivering fledgling, then back to Leo. The message was clear. This is mine. My charge. My reason. Leo saw the exhaustion in the set of Captain's head, the tremor in his good leg as he tried to stay upright guarding both the nest and now Leo. He saw the blood still seeping, diluted but persistent. This couldn't go on. The bird needed warmth. Captain needed care. The ferals could return. "Captain," Leo said again, his voice stronger now, infused with a certainty he didn't know he possessed. "Listen to me. That baby, it's freezing. It's hurt. Like you. You can't keep it warm out here. Not like this." He gestured slowly towards the blanket beside him. "This is soft. For the baby. Okay." He inched the blanket a fraction closer with his foot, towards the gap, but not blocking Captain's view. Just for the baby. So it doesn't get colder. Captain watched the blanket's movement. His good ears swiveled. He looked at the shivering fledgling, its peeps growing weaker. He looked back at Leo. The fierce protectiveness warred with a dawning understanding. Leo saw the conflict in his eyes, the ingrained feral suspicion battling against the desperate need to save his fragile ward. Captain took a hesitant step towards the blanket, sniffing it cautiously. He nudged it with his nose. The scent of lavender, of Nana Rose, of Leo's apartment, filled the damp air. He looked back at the bird, then at Leo, a silent question in his green eye. "Go on," Leo urged softly. "Help it, please." With agonizing slowness, Captain turned his attention fully to the nest. He limped the short distance to the gap. Leo held his breath. Captain dipped his head, his movements surprisingly gentle despite his size and injuries. He nudged the tiny, shivering fledgling with his scarred muzzle, a touch so careful it was almost reverent. The bird peeped weakly. Using his nose and chin with incredible delicacy, Captain carefully maneuvered the tiny creature out of its wet cardboard hollow and onto the soft, dry center of Nana Rose's lavender-scented blanket. He nudged it gently until it was settled, then stepped back, watching intently as the fledgling's violent shivering began to lessen slightly, burrowing instinctively into the warmth. Captain stood guard over the blanket nest, his body still tense, but some of the frantic energy had drained. He looked exhausted, defeated, almost. He glanced at Leo, then back at his charge on the blanket. The message was different now. Not stay away, but went out. Leo saw his chance. He slowly reached out a hand, not towards Captain, but towards the edge of the blanket near the bird. "Good," he murmured. "That's good, Captain. You did good." He kept his movements deliberate, telegraphing his intent. Captain watched his green eye tracking Leo's hand, but he didn't growl. He didn't hiss. He just stood, panting softly, rain streaming down his scarred face. Leo's fingers touched the wet, gritty edge of the blanket. He didn't grab. He simply gathered it, inch by painstaking inch, pulling it gently towards him, creating a soft, sheltered pouch around the fledgling. Captain took a limping step sideways, keeping pace, his gaze fixed on the tiny bundle now cradled in the folds of fabric Leo held. Leo gathered the blanket ends carefully, lifting the fledgling in its makeshift nest, holding it close to his chest, shielding it from the rain with his body. He looked at Captain. The cat was standing in the downpour, soaked, bloodied, trembling with exhaustion and pain. He looked at the bundle Leo held, then up at Leo's face. The fierce green eye held Leo's gaze. And in that look, Leo saw it all. The years of survival, the loneliness, the fierce, inexplicable love for a fallen bird, the utter depletion, the silent plea, "I can't do this alone anymore." Leo's throat tightened. Tears, hot and unexpected, mixed with the cold rain on his face. Not just for the bird, for Captain, for the raw, beautiful, terrifying vulnerability of choosing to care when the world was harsh. For Nana Rose. For himself. "Come on," Leo said, his voice rough with emotion. He shifted the blanket bundle to one arm, freeing his other hand. He held it out, palm up, towards Captain, an offering. Not to grab, but to follow. "Let's get you both out of the rain." Captain stared at the offered hand. He looked at the alley, his territory, his world of shadows and dumpsters and danger. He looked back at the bundle Leo held, the tiny life he'd fought for. He looked at Leo's rain-streaked face, his open hand. The moment stretched, suspended in the drumming rain. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from the very depths of his scarred soul, Captain took a limping, hesitant step forward. Then another. He didn't touch Leo's hand, but he walked beside him, matching his slow pace, his wet fur brushing against Leo's soaked jeans, as Leo turned and led the way back towards the open door, towards warmth, towards the unknown. The storm raged on, but in the alley, drenched and bleeding and carrying a miracle wrapped in a lavender blanket, a silent pact had been forged. The warrior had lowered his guard. The witness had become the shelter. The breaking point had become the bridge. The apartment door clicked shut, muffling the roar of the storm outside. Inside, the silence felt vast, fragile, charged with the weight of the dripping trio huddled in the small entryway. Rainwater pooled on the worn linoleum. Leo stood frozen for a second, the bundled blanket warm against his chest, Captain a tense, wet shadow pressed against his leg. The familiar scent of dust and old wood and Nana Rose's lingering lavender was suddenly overpowered by the raw, wet animal smell of the alley, soaked fur, damp earth, and the faint, coppery tang of blood. Captain flinched at the click of the door, his single eye wide, darting around the unfamiliar space, the stacked boxes draped in sheets, the old armchair, the ticking clock on the mantel. His body vibrated with low-grade tension, a coiled spring ready to snap. He took a limping step away from Leo, hackles slightly raised, sniffing the air with intense suspicion. His gaze kept flicking back to the bundle in Leo's arms, then scanning the room's corners, the doorways. Guard duty wasn't over, the battlefield had just changed. Okay, Leo breathed, his own heart still hammering. We're inside. His voice sounded too loud in the sudden quiet. He moved slowly, deliberately, towards the clearer space near the couch. He needed surfaces, supplies, light. He set the lavender bundle down gently on the worn cushion. The tiny peep from within was weak, barely audible. Captain instantly limped closer, positioning himself beside the couch, his good eye fixed on the blanket, ignoring his own dripping form and the dark stains spreading on his shoulder fur. Leo didn't hesitate. He moved with a focus born of adrenaline and necessity. He grabbed clean towels from Nana Rose's linen closet, thick, soft cotton smelling faintly of cedar. He filled a bowl with lukewarm water. He found the small first aid kit he'd packed, rummaging for antiseptic wipes and gauze pads. The practical tasks anchored him, pushing back the lingering shock of claws and rain and blood. First, the bird. He peeled back the blanket folds carefully. The fledgling lay shivering, a pitiful scrap of gray down plastered to fragile skin. Its tiny chest fluttered rapidly. The awkward bend in its wing looked worse in the light. A clean break, Leo hoped, not shattered. Using the corner of a towel dampened with warm water, he gently dabbed at its soaked feathers, trying to lift the chill without startling it. The bird peeped weakly, its beak opening and closing soundlessly. "Easy, little one," Leo murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "Easy now." He fashioned a small nest from another towel, lining it with soft scraps of an old t-shirt, and placed the fledgling inside, tucking the edges loosely around it for warmth. He set the nest back on the couch cushion, within Captain's unwavering line of sight. Then, Captain. Leo approached slowly, holding out a dry towel. "Your turn, big guy." Captain eyed the towel, then Leo, then the bird nest. A low rumble started in his chest, a warning. Leo stopped. He placed the towel on the floor near Captain's feet. "For you to get dry." He retreated a step. Captain sniffed the towel cautiously. After a tense moment, he lowered his head and began to rub his wet face against the terry cloth, a rough, awkward motion. He moved stiffly, favoring his injured shoulder and leg. Leo watched, his chest tight. The gash on Captain's shoulder was deeper than he'd realized, the fur matted with blood and rain. The legs seemed swollen. Leo dampened a washcloth with warm water and antiseptic solution. He knelt on the floor, keeping distance. "I need to clean that cut, Captain. It'll sting. But it needs to be done." He held the cloth out, not moving closer. Captain paused his rubbing, fixing Leo with that intense green stare. He looked from the cloth to his own shoulder, then back to the quiet bird nest. He seemed to weigh the discomfort against the need to stay functional, to guard. Slowly, stiffly, he shifted his weight, exposing the injured shoulder slightly. Permission. Tentative, hard-won trust. Leo moved with infinite care. He dabbed the warm, antiseptic cloth against the edges of the wound. Captain flinched, a sharp hiss escaping him, but he didn't pull away. His muscles tensed under Leo's touch, a tremor running through his wet body. Leo cleaned as gently as he could, wiping away blood and grit, revealing the angry red gash beneath. He pressed a clean gauze pad against it, holding it lightly. "Good boy," he murmured, the praise instinctive. "You're doing good." He wrapped another towel loosely around Captain's torso, securing the pad, creating a makeshift bandage. Captain endured it, his gaze never leaving the fledgling. He then lowered himself heavily onto the towel Leo had offered, curling up as best he could with his injuries, his body a protective arc facing the couch. His breathing was still rapid, shallow. Exhaustion radiated from him. Leo sank back onto the floor, leaning against the couch, facing Captain. The adrenaline was ebbing, leaving him drained, soaked, shivering slightly himself. He looked at the two creatures he'd brought in from the storm. The tiny bird, Pip, the name popped into his head unbidden, sticking instantly, nestled in its towel nest, breathing more steadily now, asleep or conserving energy. Captain, the scarred warrior, bandaged and weary, his single eye half closed but still watchful, a low, almost inaudible purr starting to rumble deep in his chest. Not contentment, Leo realized, but a self-soothing vibration, a primal attempt to heal. The silence settled again, different now. Not the hollow silence of grief, but a shared, watchful quiet, filled with the soft sounds of recovery, Pip's faint breaths, Captain's rumbling purr, the steady tick-tick-tick of Nana Rose's clock. The rain drummed softly against the windows, a lullaby now, not a threat. Days blurred into a new, tender rhythm. Leo's apartment transformed into an impromptu animal infirmary. Pip needed constant care, warmth, tiny droplets of water offered on the tip of a finger, mashed up hard-boiled egg yolk painstakingly fed with tweezers every hour. Leo researched frantically online, learning about fledgling care, wing injuries. He fashioned a tiny splint for Pip's wing from a popsicle stick and gauze, holding his breath as the tiny bird endured the indignity. Captain recovered faster, his resilience astounding. The shoulder wound, kept clean, began to knit. The stiffness in his leg eased. But his focus remained unwavering, Pip. He stationed himself near the towel nest on the couch, or later, on a soft pillow Leo placed on the floor beside it. He slept lightly, his good ear constantly twitching towards the fledgling sounds. When Pip peeped for food, Captain would lift his head, watching Leo's ministrations intently, as if supervising. When Pip fluttered awkwardly in his confined space, testing his splinted wing, Captain would follow the movements with his green eye, a low, soft chirp sometimes escaping him, a sound Leo had never heard before, gentle, encouraging. Leo found his own grief shifting, softening around the edges. Sorting Nana Rose's things continued, but it was no longer a solitary burden. He talked to Captain as he worked, telling him about the woman in the photos, her terrible singing, her legendary cinnamon rolls. Captain would listen, blinking slowly, his purr a constant, grounding hum. Sometimes, Leo would catch Captain staring at a particular photo, one of Nana Rose laughing in her garden, sunlight on her face. He'd look at it with that same unnerving intensity, then back at Pip, as if drawing a connection Leo couldn't quite see. The guilt that had gnawed at him began to transmute. Watching Captain's fierce, selfless devotion to Pip, Leo saw a reflection of the love he had given Nana Rose, imperfectly, but truly. He saw that protecting wasn't about being perfect, it was about showing up. About choosing to care, even when it was messy, even when you were scared and scarred yourself. The weight in his chest didn't vanish, but it became something he could carry. He started making decisions, keeping Nana's recipe box, donating her clothes, deciding to stay in the apartment, at least for now. The city outside the window felt less hostile, more like a place where unexpected connections could bloom, even in the grimy cracks. Pip grew stronger. His down fluffed out into proper feathers, sleek gray and white. His peeps became louder, more demanding. He began flapping his good wing vigorously, testing the air, straining against the confinement of his nest and the splint on the other wing. Captain watched these developments with a mixture of pride and anxiety. Leo couldn't be sure. The cat's vigilance never wavered, but there was a new tension in him when Pip fluttered too energetically. One bright morning, 2 weeks after the storm, Leo carefully removed Pip's splint. The wing was still slightly crooked, but the bone had knitted. Pip stretched both wings wide, flapping furiously, letting out a surprisingly loud chirp. He hopped to the edge of his towel nest, looking out at the sunlit room with bright, curious eyes. Captain, lying nearby, instantly sat up, his posture alert, watchful. Pip hopped down onto the floor. He took a few wobbly steps, flapped again, and managed a short, clumsy glide to the leg of the armchair. He landed awkwardly, chirping triumphantly. Captain was on his feet in an instant. He didn't pounce. He didn't hiss. He padded silently over to the base of the chair and sat down, looking up at Pip perched precariously above him. He made that soft chirping sound again. Leo held his breath, watching this silent communion. Pip looked down at the big, scarred cat, cocked his head, and chirped back. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Conversation. Leo knew then. The time was coming. Pip was healing. Pip needed the sky. Captain's job, his fierce, improbable guardianship, was nearing its natural end. The apartment, their shared sanctuary, was becoming too small for the fledgling spirit. Leo looked at Captain, sitting patiently beneath the chair, his green eye fixed on the bird he'd saved. There was no sadness in that gaze, Leo realized. Only a deep, quiet watchfulness. A completion. The warrior had done his duty. The spark he'd sheltered was ready to fly. The rhythm of their days, so intensely focused on healing and protection, was about to change once more. The shared silence now held a new note, the bittersweet understanding of an impending farewell and the quiet strength found in letting go. The apartment, once a cavern of dust and echoes, now hummed with a different kind of life. Pip's insistent chirps had become the soundtrack of their days, a bright counterpoint to the steady tick of Nana Rose's clock. He was a whirlwind of gray and white feathers, hopping, fluttering, practicing takeoffs from the back of the couch to the armchair, landing with increasingly confident thumps. His crooked wing, while not perfectly symmetrical, held strong. He eyed the world beyond the windows with a fierce, avian curiosity that couldn't be contained by walls and glass. Captain watched it all. He no longer stationed himself rigidly beside Pip's nest. He'd found a new perch, the worn armchair by the window, bathed in afternoon sun. From there, he had a panoramic view, Pip's aerial acrobatics within the apartment, and the bustling slice of Brooklyn life unfolding 3 stories below. His vigilance had softened into something more like supervision, or perhaps preparation. His single green eye followed Pip's every flutter, every chirp, every tilt of the tiny head towards the sky visible through the glass. There was no anxiety in that gaze anymore, Leo realized. Only a deep, quiet acceptance. A knowing. Leo felt it too. The apartment, their shared sanctuary, was becoming a cage for Pip's spirit. The instinct was undeniable, written in the frantic beating of wings against the windowpane on sunny mornings, the way Pip would cock his head at the raucous calls of starlings gathering on the rooftops. Captain's job, his fierce, improbable guardianship born in a rain-lashed alley, was complete. The spark he'd sheltered was aflame now, ready to join the larger fire. The decision settled over Leo with a quiet certainty, tinged with inevitable sadness. He researched local wildlife rehabilitators, but something held him back. Pip wasn't a wild-caught bird needing rehabilitation. He was alley-born, captain-raised, human-tended. His survival instincts were sharp, honed by observation and Captain's silent tutelage. Releasing him near the bakery alley felt right. It was his origin point, Captain's territory, a place Leo could watch over, at least initially. He prepared practically, his heart heavy. He bought mealworms, Pip's favorite. He identified a quiet corner of the bakery's roof, accessible from the fire escape, sheltered but open. He practiced leaving the window open wider for longer periods, letting in the sounds and smells of the city, watching Pip puff up his feathers, listening intently. Captain observed these preparations from his armchair throne, his expression unreadable. He didn't try to block the open window. He didn't herd Pip away from it. He simply watched, his purr a soft, constant rumble. The morning Leo chose dawned clear and crisp, the air smelling of baking bread and the faint promise of autumn. Sunlight streamed through the windows, gilding dust motes in the air. Pip was particularly energetic, flapping vigorously from bookshelf to curtain rod, chirping loudly. Captain stretched languidly on the armchair, his bandage long gone, the scar on his shoulder a pale ridge beneath his fur. He watched Pip's aerial display with half-lidded eyes, seemingly relaxed, but Leo saw the subtle tension in his ears, the way his tail tip flicked just once. "Today's the day, little guy," Leo murmured, scooping Pip gently into his hands. The bird felt warm, vibrant, his tiny heart beating rapidly against Leo's palm. He chirped, pecking gently at Leo's finger, not with fear, but with familiarity. Leo carried him towards the open window where Captain now stood, having silently jumped down from the armchair. The big cat sat regally on the fire escape landing, just outside the window, facing the alley, his back to the room. He didn't look back as Leo stepped out beside him. The city sounds were louder here: traffic, distant shouts, the clatter from the bakery below. Pip immediately stilled in Leo's hands, his bright eyes wide, taking it all in. His head swiveled, tracking a pigeon that swooped past. Captain remained utterly still, a statue carved from scarred fur and watchful silence. He stared straight ahead, his profile sharp against the morning light, his single eye fixed on the bustling street beyond the alley mouth. It was as if he was giving Pip space. Privacy for this momentous step. Leo crouched on the metal grating, the coolness seeping through his jeans. He held Pip out towards the open air, towards the bakery roof, just a short hop and a flutter away. "Okay, Pip," he whispered, his throat tight. "This is it. Your sky." He opened his hands. For a heartbeat, Pip hesitated. He looked back at Leo, chirped once, a soft, questioning sound. Then, his gaze swept past Leo, landing on Captain's broad, still back. The cat hadn't moved a muscle. Pip fluffed his feathers, stretched his wings, the crooked one holding strong, and with a powerful push of his tiny legs, launched himself. Leo's breath caught. Pip's flight was awkward at first, a frantic fluttering, dipping alarmingly close to the alley floor. Captain's ear twitched, but he didn't turn. Then, Pip caught an updraft, a gust of wind swirling down the alley. His wings found their rhythm. He rose, gaining height, circling once over the dumpster, then twice over the bakery roof. He landed neatly on the ridge tiles, his silhouette sharp against the bright blue sky. He let out a loud, triumphant chirp, a sound Leo had never heard before, pure, unfettered bird song. Captain finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head. Not to look at Leo, but to look up. Up at Pip, perched high on the roof, singing his freedom to the Brooklyn morning. The fierce green eye held the tiny bird in its gaze. Leo saw no possessiveness, no regret. Only a profound, bone-deep satisfaction. A job impeccably done. Captain held that look for a long, silent moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate blink, a benediction, he turned his head back towards the alley, resuming his watch. His posture relaxed minutely. The sentinel could stand down. The fledgling had flown. Leo stayed on the fire escape, watching Pip explore his new rooftop kingdom, his heart a tangle of pride and loss. He glanced at Captain, this stoic, scarred creature who had taught him more about love and responsibility than any human ever had. The apartment behind them felt suddenly, profoundly empty. He stood up, ready to go back inside, to face the quiet. Later that afternoon, sorting through the last box of Nana Rose's kitchen things, mismatched mugs, chipped plates, Leo felt the familiar pang. He lifted out a stack of old recipe cards, yellowed with age, Nana's looping handwriting detailing her infamous meatloaf. A small, soft object fluttered out from between the cards and landed silently on the linoleum floor. Leo bent down. It was a feather. A small, perfect flight feather, sleek gray with a white tip. Pip's feather. He picked it up, holding it gently. It must have drifted down during one of Pip's practice flights and gotten caught in the box. He smiled faintly, a bittersweet ache in his chest. He placed it carefully on the windowsill, near where Pip's nest had been. He continued sorting, pulling out a faded floral tea towel. As he unfolded it, something else fluttered out. Another feather. Similar, but slightly smaller. Then, tucked into the fold of the towel, another. And another. Leo stared. He picked up the tea towel fully, shaking it gently. A small cascade of gray and white feathers drifted down onto the floor. 6, 7. All Pip's feathers. Carefully collected. Deliberately hidden away. His gaze snapped to Captain. The cat was stretched out in his patch of sunlight on the rug, seemingly asleep. But as Leo watched, Captain slowly opened his single eye. He looked at the feathers scattered on the floor. Then, with infinite slowness, he lifted his gaze to meet Leo's. There was no explanation in that green depth. No sentimentality. But there was awareness, acknowledgement, a silent confirmation. I knew this moment would come. I gathered these. To remember. To market. Leo sank to his knees amidst the recipe cards and feathers. He hadn't seen Captain do it. Not once. He must have gathered them meticulously, silently, during those weeks of healing, picking them up when they molted or drifted loose, carrying them in his mouth to these hidden spots. Nana Rose's recipe box, her tea towel, places saturated with memory. It wasn't hoarding. It was archiving, creating a tangible record of a love that was always meant to be temporary. A warrior's mementos of his most improbable battle and his greatest victory. Tears welled, hot and sudden. Not just for Pip's departure. For Captain's silent, profound understanding of impermanence and the importance of memory. For the way this scarred alley cat, who communicated in blinks and stillness, had found a way to say, this mattered. He mattered. We mattered. Leo gathered the feathers gently, cradling them in his palm, feeling their delicate strength. They were more than just feathers. They were Captain's final report. His quiet testament. The most eloquent, wordless gift Leo had ever received. He looked at Captain, now watching him steadily, and understood the depth of the bond forged not just in the storm, but in the quiet, feather-strewn aftermath. The protector had guarded the memory too. And in doing so, he'd given Leo a gift far greater than he could have imagined. The understanding that love, even when it flies away, leaves behind its own indelible, beautiful trace. The apartment held its breath. Pip's absence wasn't just a lack of sound, it was a shift in the air itself. The frantic energy, the insistent chirps demanding food or attention, the frantic flutter of wings against lampshades, all gone. What remained was a profound, resonant quiet, deeper somehow than the silence before Captain. It was the quiet after a song has ended, the echo holding the shape of the music. Leo stood amidst the remnants of their shared sanctuary, Pip's empty towel nest still on the couch cushion, the popsicle stick splint discarded on the coffee table, the faint scent of antiseptic lingering near the spot where Captain's wound had been tended. He looked at the small pile of gray and white feathers cradled in his palm, Captain's silent, meticulous archive of a love story written in down and flight. Captain hadn't moved from his patch of sunlight on the rug. He lay stretched out, a study in relaxed vigilance now. His single eye was closed, his breathing deep and even, the rumble of his purr a soft, contented engine idling. The fierce tension that had defined him, in the alley, guarding the cardboard box, recovering in this room, had melted away. He wasn't guarding anymore. He was home. Leo felt the truth of it settle over him, warm and undeniable, like the afternoon sun soaking into the floorboards. Captain hadn't just brought Pip in from the storm, he'd brought himself. And he'd chosen to stay. Leo carefully placed the feathers into a small, clear glass jar Nana Rose had used for buttons. He screwed the lid on tight, setting it on the windowsill beside the chipped saucer Captain's water now permanently occupied. It wasn't a cage for memory, it was a reliquary, a testament. Sunlight caught the delicate veins of the feathers, making them glow softly from within. He looked from the jar to Captain, peacefully asleep. The scarred warrior and the fragile feathers, two halves of a single, profound truth. The days that followed weren't about filling Pip's absence, but about discovering the new shape of the space Captain occupied. It was a quieter rhythm, deeper. Leo finished sorting Nana Rose's things. The decisions came easier now. He kept the recipe box, the crocheted blanket, the ceramic birds she loved. The rest he donated, the weight of stuff lifting, leaving behind only the essential warmth of her memory. He signed a new lease for the apartment. Brooklyn, with its grimy alleys and baking bread smells, felt less like a temporary stop and more like home. His home. Captain's home. Their bond deepened in the quiet spaces. Captain no longer just accepted food, he anticipated it, meeting Leo at the kitchen door in the morning with a slow blink and a soft, rumbling trill that was entirely new. He claimed the armchair by the window as his official throne, observing the alley below with the calm authority of a retired general surveying his domain. He developed a fondness for the specific patch of sunlight that moved across the rug in the afternoon, melting into a puddle of purring fur. He still rarely vocalized, but his language had expanded, a deliberate headbutt against Leo's shin when he wanted attention. A slow, luxurious stretch that ended with his paw resting gently on Leo's foot as he read, a particular, intense stare directed at the refrigerator when he fancied a bit of chicken. Leo talked to him constantly, not just about the day but about Nana Rose, about his own stumbles and small triumphs, about the strange, piercing beauty of finding family in the most unexpected, scarred package. Captain listened, his green eye holding Leo's gaze, his purr a constant, grounding hum. It felt less like talking to a pet and more like communion with a silent sage who understood the weight of survival and the quiet grace of choosing to stay. One drizzly October evening, much like the night Captain had fought the ferals, Leo sat on the floor near the armchair. Rain whispered against the windows, blurring the city lights into smears of gold and red. He was looking through the photo album again, the one that had brought him to tears weeks before. Nana Rose on the boardwalk. Nana Rose holding baby Leo. He touched her laughing face. The grief was still there, a familiar hollow, but it no longer felt like a crushing weight. It felt like a space filled with warmth, with the echo of her voice, the scent of her lavender cookies. It felt integrated. He realized Captain was watching him, not the photos. The cat had shifted, his chin resting on the arm of the chair, his single eye fixed on Leo with that unnerving depth. "You know," Leo said softly, his voice barely rising above the rain and Captain's purr. "She would have loved you. Really loved you. The scars, the one eye, the whole alley general vibe." He smiled faintly. "She had a thing for strays. Said they had the best stories." He looked back at the photo of Nana Rose in her garden, sunlight on her face. She'd have loved Pip too. Would have fussed over him just like we did. He paused, the memory of the feathers in the jar warm in his mind. She understood about holding on and letting go. About how the love stays even when things change. Even when they fly away. Captain held his gaze. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lifted his head. He stretched out his uninjured front paw across the space between the chair and where Leo sat. Not reaching for anything. Just extending. His massive paw, pads rough from alley life, came to rest gently on Leo's knee. It was a simple touch. Solid. Heavy with unspoken understanding. It wasn't a demand. It wasn't a plea. It was an anchor. A quiet declaration. "I'm here. We're here. This is now." Leo placed his hand over Captain's paw. The rough pads, the warmth, the sheer, solid presence of it sent a wave of pure, uncomplicated gratitude through him. This scarred creature, carved by hardship, who had fought for a fallen bird and then, against every instinct, chosen to trust, to stay. He was the unexpected compass Leo hadn't known he needed. Captain had shown him that protection wasn't about walls, but about presence. That love wasn't erased by departure, it was transformed into memory, carried forward. That family wasn't defined by blood or perfection, but by the fierce, quiet choice to show up, scars and all, and stand your ground for the fragile sparks of life you find along the way. He thought of Pip. He pictured him not as the helpless fledgling, but as he'd last seen him, strong, confident, claiming his rooftop kingdom, his song bright against the Brooklyn sky. He hadn't vanished. He'd taken the love Captain had given him, the care Leo had offered, and flown with it into his own story. The feathers in the jar weren't a loss. They were a map of that journey, a physical echo of wings that had found their sky. Leo looked out the rain-streaked window, down into the alley where it had all begun. The wet pavement shimmered under a streetlight. The dumpster stood sentinel. It was the same alley, yet utterly transformed. It wasn't just a grimy passage anymore. It was sacred ground. The place where a one-eyed warrior had found his purpose, where a lost man had found his way, where a tiny bird had been given back the sky. It was a reminder that miracles don't always roar. Sometimes, they arrive silent and scarred, smelling of wet fur and alley grit, carrying the weight of the world and the fierce, unbreakable will to protect one tiny, trembling spark. Captain's paw remained on his knee, a steady weight. The purr vibrated up Leo's arm. The rain whispered its old song against the glass. The clock ticked. The apartment, filled with the ghosts of lavender and the tangible presence of a battle-scarred cat, felt profoundly, peacefully full. Leo knew there would be other storms, other losses, other moments of feeling adrift. But he also knew he wouldn't face them alone. He had a compass now, a silent guardian, a living testament to the fierce, resilient beauty of second chances, found not in the easy places, but in the rain-slicked alleys of the heart. He looked down at Captain, meeting that fierce, intelligent green eye. The message was clear, wordless, echoing in the space between purrs and raindrops. This is where we belong. This is enough. This is everything. The silence settled, warm and deep, cradling the unspoken truth that sometimes the most heroic act isn't fighting off a pack, but simply choosing to stay. Choosing to open the door. Choosing to trust the scarred creature in the rain. And discovering in that choice that the loneliest sound in the world has been replaced by the quiet, steady purr of home. If Leo and Captain's journey touched your heart, if that moment when a scarred warrior chose to protect a fallen bird resonated with you, then please, do us a kindness. Tap that like button. It tells us these stories matter. Hit subscribe. It means you'll be right here when the next tale of unexpected courage and quiet connection unfolds. And most importantly, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? Your city, your country, sharing that connects us all in this quiet community of hearts moved by the extraordinary stories of ordinary creatures. Ring that little bell icon too, so you never miss a single story. We share these glimpses of hope and resilience daily, and your support is the reason we can keep finding them. Thank you truly for being part of this, for witnessing Captain's fierce love, Pip's brave flight, and Leo's quiet rediscovery of home. Until the next story, take care of the sparks of life around you. You never know what miracles they might hold.